All right. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to what promises to be a rather candid conversation on LLM programs. Now, if you are applying for an LLM program in December 2020, then this is the session for you. And if you were unsuccessful in obtaining admission in prior years or were unsuccessful in obtaining any kind of scholarship or grant, then again, this session is for you. And lastly, if you're a current student who's kind of overwhelmed about what to do in the future, then this session hopes to be a sort of starting point in helping you decide if an LLM program is a good fit for you. My name is Orubah Sattar Ahmed, and I've been asked in my capacity as an adjunct faculty member at LUMS by the LUMS Law and Alumni Association to moderate today's session. Now, this, of course, is not how sane people choose to spend their Friday night, but I am exceptionally privileged to sort of announce that we've got a very good panel ahead of us who are hopefully going to try to help you out as you go along with your applications. Now, when we were trying to figure out the aim of this particular session, I was acutely aware that so much of what are the LLM programs and the admission process has already been said, that we are not going to go for anything novel. Instead, our aim is just going to be disseminating as much information as we can to students out there on how to go about in figuring out which program to apply for and how to apply for it. And as someone who interacts daily with students, I can assure you that the panelists on this side of the screen are fully aware that the application deadlines are just around the corner and that you're trying to nail down the seemingly perfect application in very imperfect conditions. So the sole motivation of everyone here is just to sort of help you out as you're struggling. The panelists for today's sessions are recent admits or graduates of LLM programs who have the most up-to-date insight about admission procedures, as well as personal experience of doing their LLMs in the middle of a global pandemic. All of them have done their LLMs from very different geographical regions and will therefore give you the insight about which country to go to, which kind of LLM programs you should be applying for, depending on what strikes your fancy. First up, we've got Salman Tahir. He graduated from LUMS in 2019, and he is currently at Australian National University where he's pursuing his LLM. Prior to this, Salman worked at RSIL as well as Sheikh and Dahir. And I've been told that he can give us a lot of insight about how the life is in Australia because he's there right now. So welcome, Salman. Second up, we've got Umair Salim, who graduated from LUMS in the year of 2014. And he did his first LLM from KU Leuven, which is in Belgium. And he's currently expected to finish his second LLM from Pace University, which is in New York in 2021, where he's an environmental law fellow. So all of you people out there who are very enthusiastic about environmental law, this is the guy that you should be listening to. And his second LLM is actually in energy and climate change. And Umair was previously employed at Hassan Qureshi in Mamdouh, and he's done a lot of work over there as well. Unfortunately, Umair will only be here for 1 hour. So, you know, if you have any specific questions for him, do send them in the chat. Apart from that, the next panelist we've got is Amna Khan, who is from the LUMS batch of... I'm so sorry?
Assalamu alaikum, everybody.
Hi, Amna. Okay, so next up we have got Amna Khan, who's from the batch of 2018. She has done her LLM from SOAS. She is a Chevening scholar. She's currently practicing international arbitration at Withers Worldwide. And she's previously worked at CLM as well as in the capacity of the Legislative and Research Department of the National Assembly. And another thing about Amna is that if you're not following her Twitter, you should immediately do so because it's very funny. And last up, we have got Maria Khan. Unfortunately, she's not here right now, but she's going to join us any moment. And Maria did her LLM from Michigan in 2020 as the Michigan Grotius Fellow. And currently she's a data privacy legal analyst at security.ai. And prior to this, she's also worked at Raja Muhammad and Co. So these are our panelists, and I really do think that we've got quite a diverse group right now. So broadly speaking, in today's session, we're going to hit three major discussion points. Number one, what is the kind of mindset that you should have before applying? This is more for students who will be applying next year or the year after that. And the second theme that we want to hit is the application process itself, how it differs, what to keep in mind, and what are the mistakes not to make. And lastly, what to do once you do actually get in. So those are like the sort of themes that we want to hit upon. So welcome everyone. I was hoping that I could just give out the first question and then each one of you can address it. So I guess my first question would be that what exactly is an LLM, and what do you think are some of the reasons as to why people do undertake an LLM? And in hindsight, do you think that, because personally what I've seen in my experiences, that the kind of reasons that you have for pursuing an LLM ultimately define the kind of year that you do end up having? So are there any wrong reasons per se for doing an LLM, and what were your exact reasons, and how do you think those reasons then influence the kind of year that you've had? And I'm going to first call upon Omer to discuss this.
Thank you, Orubah. Well, I guess everyone has some common reasons to pursue an LLM. I can share my own experience and the reasons why I choose to pursue LLM after 5 years of my legal practice. From the start of 2019, although I was earning a handsome amount and was involved in some of the major corporate transactions and litigations in Pakistan, I felt that my life and law practice had become stagnant, and I needed to have international exposure to obtain new ideas or challenge the old ones. To be very honest, I also needed a break from the professional work, which I had continuously been doing throughout my legal career till very late each night. From my first LLM from KU Leuven in Europe gave me an opportunity of learning about international and European law, and I got a chance to visit more than 15 countries in 1 year despite the harsh COVID conditions. I also had options to choose courses from diverse areas of law. I was able to make international contacts all across the Europe. Although LLM is itself is itself a good addition to CV, it also allows you a chance to have many publications. I also wrote several academic papers for LLM, which I am intending to publish next year. An LLM from a foreign university does not only allow you to improve your English and language skills, but also allows you to choose your area of interest and specialization that you want to pursue in life. And for my second LLM from Pace University, I choose environmental law because of my interest in it. I'm currently studying LLM in environmental law and working as an environmental law fellow at the same time in New York. And I'm also planning to go to New York next month. So I think these were my reasons to pursue an LLM, and I guess there are no wrong reasons to pursue it. So thank you.
All right. Salman, do you have anything to add on? Like, what were your like sort of reasons for doing it?
Yeah. So firstly, I agree that there are no wrong reasons, but the reasons might be different. So my reasons for pursuing LLM were almost the opposite of Umair's reasons, in a sense that I wanted to go early because I didn't want to work for 5, 6 years, establish myself, and then leave the country for a year or two. I wanted to get a head start with doing all the academic stuff first and then get into the more substantive practical life. I specifically chose Australia because of three reasons. Firstly, because of the time constraint. Australia starts its LLM in February and ends in December. So I wanted to leave early as soon as possible after I finished my graduation. The second thing was the cost constraint, in a sense that Australia is almost half as expensive as US if you don't have a scholarship. And lastly would be so this is something which I've discussed with a few people before when I moved. I think, and the people I was talking to think that there is certain saturation in England and US if you want to pursue LLM and make networks and establish connections. While there was some room, there was room in Australia to make your name and to establish connections. So those were the reasons I thought of when I started looking for LLM.
All right, all right. And like, did you, by the way, talk to anyone who had done their LLM from Australia beforehand? I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah, so there are a few people in Lahore. Actually, one of them is working in CLM. So he did his LLM. So he was doing his LLM last year. He came back at the start of 2020. I talked to people like him, and I think people know Dr. Moin Chima. He used to teach in LUMS a few years ago. So he is currently the associate dean at ANU, my university. So I did get in touch with these people. I got in touch with a few lawyers who are practicing in Australia. So yeah.
So like the closed network then obviously like played a huge role in sort of helping you decide like where you wanted to go. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, yeah. So Amna, you then went to the United Kingdom, obviously on a Chevening scholarship. So what were the major reasons over there? Did the Chevening scholarship in itself like help you guide about which university to attend, or?
No, they don't guide anything. I think Chevening is a very independent thing. In the end, you apply yourself, you get an offer, and in the end, you tell them where you want to go. They don't really decide where you go or where you don't go. I think I actually did have a wrong reason for wanting to go. Like I had one right reason and one wrong reason. And my right reason was that I wanted to teach. So I think if you're thinking of an academic career, it's better to just have an LLM really quickly rather than delaying it. But my wrong reason was, and I think that's something like that ladies can relate to, is that like we're usually given like a timestamp for education. So it was more like, when I got the scholarship, I kind of wanted to work for one more year to know exactly what I wanted to do. But my parents were like, oh no, you have to get it before you're 25, which I think like in hindsight, I would have waited a little longer. But I do think that when I went for my LLM and you see uh, fields of law being taught that you do not have access to in Pakistan, it did help me realize a bit better what I want to go into, which I think maybe practice wouldn't have. So in hindsight, it worked out, but I do think that putting a timestamp on your education it's not really a good reason to go, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, but like you do feel like you were prepared enough to go, right? Like in hindsight, do you feel like if you had gotten a bit more, a couple of years down the lane, you could have maybe performed better during your LLM?
I think I performed well enough, but maybe I would have known better how to organize my courses. So I ended up doing investment arbitration. And now that I look back, I think that, oh, maybe I should have taken this one course that at that time I didn't know that would be so useful. But I think it worked out well enough, but it could have been better, in my opinion.
Okay, okay. That's actually been, I'm sure that a lot of people can actually relate to that, and that's been super helpful. So we're also, I think, no, we're still waiting for Maria. She's trying to join in, but I guess we can just move on to the next question. So now that we've sort of outlined the kind of reasons that people can have for doing the LLM in the first place, whether it's for ascending in the job market or for better pay or just for more exposure or for a teaching career, for building better networks. How do you sort of, and what has been your personal sort of journey in narrowing down the regions that you chose to apply for? I guess Salman has more or less answered a lot of that question, but also the sort of universities that you end up applying to. And did the region decide your choice, or did the university decide the region? Was the specialization that you wanted to go for a huge factor in it as well? And is there a process or a science that you can sort of tell our audience that they can employ when they're trying to decide which university to go to? Umair, I'm just going to start with you again.
Okay, thank you, Ruba. So I'll again share my own experience. When I decided to pursue an LLM, the biggest challenge was for me to find the right university. I was aware that it could be difficult for me to find any scholarship because of the relatively low grades that I received in the undergrad. I was also aware about my strengths, that I had substantial and diverse experience of working with prominent individuals in Pakistan, as well as on diverse areas of law. Keeping these in mind, I started to make a table of all the requirements of top 75 universities in the world. There were some universities which were very strict about their GPA requirement, and there were some universities which were lenient in this regard. After carefully analyzing the requirements, I narrowed down my research to 7 universities in which I applied. So because of this intensive practice, I was able to get admission in each university that I applied in, some of which were offering me partial financial aid. So I narrowed down my choices to the universities which had higher ranking internationally and which were giving me maximum financial aid because I was financing my own LLM. Once I compared the remaining payable fee of the universities in US, UK, and Europe, it was a wise choice for me to pursue an LLM in Europe from KU Leuven, which is one of the oldest and among the top 40 universities worldwide, and usually gives financial aid and some other scholarships to most of the students. So even otherwise, if we compare the fee of the European universities to other universities in US or UK, the total fee of the European universities is relatively very low. That even the KU Leuven's fee was only 6,000 euros, which is substantially lower than the fee of the other universities in other part of the world. So I can share with you all these requirements tables that I made when selecting my own university. I would really want this alumni association or anyone else to update those requirement tables of the universities that I made more than a year ago. So I think that this will certainly be helpful for our students and alumni who want to pursue an LLM abroad in top universities. And I'm also willing to work on this, whatever is required of me.
Yeah. I think that sounds like a really good idea. Salman, did you perhaps like have a different process than just like looking at the rankings and then looking at the finances, or as you've talked about, going to Australia specifically, was Australia always your first choice because of the reasons you mentioned before?
Uh, so Australia was my first choice, but ANU was not. So initially, when I first started looking out for universities, I thought of going to University of Melbourne. Um, and the prime reason for that was the ranking of the university globally and in Australia as well. But so I think that is a very good starting point if you want to narrow down universities, just to look at that particular page on the university's website, that why ANU or why Melbourne or why any university for that matter. And it's also very important because it's all about what you want to do with your LLM, whether you want to pursue an academic degree in your LLM, whether you want to focus on more practical aspects. So I wanted to focus on the practical aspects, and I just started to email people at both universities to get a response. And I think when looking back at it, I think ANU was a more balanced choice. For instance, I took a course called International Developmental Law. The same course was being offered at University of Melbourne, but the course content and course outline and the structure in which the course was built was completely different. In terms of in ANU, it was more focused on case studies, whereas at Uni Melbourne, it was more focused on academia. So yeah, it's all about what you want to do with your LLM. ANU offered me a scholarship, so that made my choices pretty easy.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right. So the topic about ranking keeps coming up, right? That rankings also like help you to determine sort of where you want to go. Amna, how much of has that played when you were sort of looking at universities? Because I see that you mentioned how one of your motivations was of doing an LLM was to pursue an academic career in the future. So did rankings play a huge part, or did you also like sort of look at the faculty members and the sort of specialization that you wanted to do and the kind of scholarship that a particular university is, churning out in helping you decide which university you wanted to go to?
Um, I think rankings did play a part. So I was recommended SOAS by a lot of people who actually wrote my recommendation. And I did look at the faculty, and it was primarily through SOAS that I got some work experience. They might not be really great on the law rankings, but some of their programs are really good. Like people who are in those fields know about that program.
Yeah.
But I definitely think that ranking as well as the location is very, very important. So for me, my second choice was like not in UK, it was this place in Switzerland, which is right next to the UN. And a lot of people don't know about it, but it's really, really high on the rankings, and it's not that expensive either. Like it's more affordable than a UK education. And so for me, location and rankings together were important. So it was really important for me to live in like a big city, because i'm I'm also a journalist, and I think making those kind of contacts and meeting people who live in big cities and operate there was very important for me. So actually my evening suggested that I go to Edinburgh, which is better on the rankings, but I kind of gave up on that because I wanted to live in London.
Hmm.
um, I think it's a mix of both. You should know what you want and then look at it. Rankings isn't everything. It's a mix of what you want, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So like sort of having an idea beforehand about the kind of experience that you want to have, or
Mhm.
the sort of outcome that you want from the LLM experience itself, can help you determine which thing then factors more. Ranking, faculty, location, all of those things can then, and finances, obviously, all of them can play a part. Um, Maria, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so glad you're here finally.
Thank you, Orubah. Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah. So, how did you end up like going to Michigan then? Sorry for asking this so informally, but you know, like how did that happen?
Yeah. So as everyone else is mentioning the factors that they took into consideration, and I think for me, finances was an important factor. I was specifically looking for a university that could offer me financial aid or some form of scholarship. So I did not apply to many universities. Like I only applied to 3 universities in the United States because I wanted to go to US, one thing, and then I wanted to apply on the basis of good ranking. And then out of the good ranked universities, I shortlisted on the basis of scholarship because I wanted to get as much as scholarship as it is possible for me. So, unfortunately, I mean, the Michigan Grotius Fellowship was particularly very attractive for me. Like the entire fellowship, and it's a mixture of both merit based and need based. So this was very appealing to me, the fellowship. This was one reason that motivated me to apply to Michigan. And the second reason, maybe I would like to mention, is the short class size, the short class LLM class size of the Michigan. So, like, we're only around 35 LLM students, and I think, it's a great thing if you have a shorter class size, because then you get to interact with your students much easier as compared to if you are really large in number. And it also your teachers know you, all of your teachers, they know all 35 students by your name, so it gets easier for you to interact with students and for with professors. So these were my main motivations, and the background why I ended up in Michigan, or why did I consider applying to the University of Michigan.
Yeah, and I guess like another reason could also be that what you intend to do in the future can also, make a difference in which university you apply to. So, for example, Michigan has a very small cohort of people, and then out of those very small cohort of people, people can do their PhD. Um, they're selected on the basis of their LLM performance for their PhD. Similarly, Yale also has a very small class specifically designed so that people can go later on in academia. So choosing a sort of university would then also determine where you want to end up later on. Um, all right. I think that we've more or less covered the, yeah, I think we've more or less covered like the initial procedure, but let's go to the actual thing that I think everyone wants to sort of talk about, which is how do you determine or make or craft the perfect application which ensures that you get admitted in the first place? And the biggest question that I've seen nearly all of my students ask me is the personal statement. And then there are a variety of ways to tackle it. Now, I've seen personal statements in my experience which are not personal at all, which just talk about ambition and what they want to do in the future and link it to the program. And then I've seen personal statements which are so personal that I feel embarrassed when I'm reading it, like I'm creeping in and reading something which is very secretive. So it seems like that people have their own way of dealing with it and it still gets admitted. So is there a secret to crafting a personal statement which will be accepted all like across the board? Or is there a difference in how different regions look at it? So does the UK, for example, look at it differently? Does Australian community look at it differently? Does the US demand something different from the personal statements? And how much room is there in a personal statement for creativity? And perhaps we can start with Omer on this one.
Thank you, Orubah. First of all, I would like to mention that personal statement is the most essential part of an application, and you should spend maximum time on structure and content of this statement. So a strong statement can increase your chances of admission, and generally all the universities specify the question that you need to answer in the personal statements. So the personal statement should not just lay out your experiences already mentioned in your CV, but should supplement all the information you have provided to the university. So one of the possible way to write this can be to share what you have learned from major experiences mentioned in your CV. You have to be specific about your learning of the past and future goals and why you want to pursue an LLM from a specific university. So you must present it in a manner which will distinguish you from other candidates. The personal statements can also allow you to explain the reasons of any weakness or negative elements that you may have in your application. Like in my case, I had a GPA problem, so I had to justify it in my personal statement, and this was one of the reasons that I also got admission in the KU Live 1. So I'll say that in personal statement, it should supplement all the information that you have provided already to the university, and it should also have a personal touch, and it should not be too personal, and like you have to manage, you have to find a what do you call it, a balance point in which you will write about your personal experiences as well as experiences that you want to pursue in your future. So I think personal statements are very essential, and you should also spend maximum time on this.
Yeah, but Omer, so your experience is pretty interesting because you've gotten admitted into two LLM programs, and
Yeah.
one of them is in Europe, and then you've got the other one in the US. So was there a difference in how you tackled the personal statements for both regions?
So in the KU Live 1, I had to like justify my grades that I received in previous university in LUMS. Like to be very honest, I didn't used to give too much time to studies at that time, but then I realized that I missed out on a lot of things. But when I came to professional life, I started to work heavily, and There was like for my initial 2 years, there was no day in which I didn't work till 2 a.m. in the night. So I had a lot of experience, and I explained this in my statement in for the KU. And I think because I was covering everything that was negative in my CV, so that was the main reason that I got admission in KU. So on the other hand, I had a very good interest in environmental laws. So that's why I chose to do environmental law from the Pace University. And I otherwise had been participating in some of the judicial commissions, environmental judicial commissions, and I was also working with some prominent lawyers. So I mentioned this all experience and what I learned from each of the environmentalist. So after mentioning everything like this, I think my personal statement got stronger, and that's why I got admission in Pace University.
Yeah, so you just make up for any kind of perceived deficiency in your
Yeah,
application by,
yeah. You just
bolstering your
have to
personal
explain it. Yeah,
as much as possible.
that's my
Um,
view. Obviously, the other panelists' views can be different.
yeah, of course, Salman. Do you want to talk about like how you tackle your personal statement and if there's any perfect way of doing it? Like, would you like to guide the sort of audience right now of students?
Um, so in Australia, firstly, the personal statement which I was supposed to write was only limited to 200 words, which was very interesting slash different because
Yeah.
in my final year, I was training myself to write personal statements of around 1,000 words, asking people to show me their personal statements. And when I saw the application, it was like maximum 200 words. So the universities asked a simple question that why do you think you should be selected? And because of the word constraint, I just focused on two things. I just focused on a case which I was working on at the moment with the law firm, and I focused on how that case would be different in Australia because of the way Australian legal system is more modernized than Pakistani legal system, and I want to learn how that can be replicated to Pakistan. So, uh, a personal story, which was the case, is linked to the university's output, which the university can provide to you, and how that can benefit you, and in turn, you can benefit the country you're coming from. Because one thing which everyone likes is that you learn from an European university and then go back, help out your country.
Yeah.
So that was my strategy.
Okay. I mean, that sounds like quite difficult, putting sort of your entire life story in 200 words. Um,
I think 19 days on the personal statement because it's very different for 200 words than for a longer one.
yeah. It's also advised to spend a lot longer on your personal statement. I wonder what you have to say about that, Amna. Like, how much time and effort did you spend on your particular personal statement, and how did you approach it? Especially because you also had like Chevening scholarship going on and essays for it, which I'm guessing demanded different kind of answers.
I actually think that there's no perfect personal statement. I think you have to tailor it towards every different school or scholarship, particularly if it's a scholarship, because you have to realize that scholarships are also kind of political. They're not really looking for just the best students, they have like a goal in mind. So before you apply to any scholarship, you should read a lot about it, about their aims, their goals, what they do in Pakistan. So Shevening, for example, they didn't have one personal statement. It had four essays, which were all 500 words. So that was really difficult, right? Because they were quite broad questions like, oh, what is your experience in leadership? And then you had to sum it all up in 500 words. But like, so for example, I applied to the Fulbright. I got to the interview. I applied to Chevening and I applied to Switzerland. And in all of them, I employed very, very different tactics. So I think American universities demand maybe a little more different style. I'm not an expert on that, but Chevening is a very, very professional and career oriented scholarship. So I wasn't really very personal in that. And I had to check. And even later, when I got the scholarship and I talked to the people who select the candidates, they told me that they look very, very importantly at the career goals and at how well you network. So I think it's very important to make your essays or personal statement very specific to what you're applying for. I would not recommend writing like a blanket personal statement. But again, that's been my experience applying to different countries. So applying to, for example, in Switzerland, I had to, my personal statement was all about what I wanted to study in, and not so much about my extracurriculars. So I think you really have to study the school or whatever you're applying to and know what they're looking for. So that's just been my experience.
All right. Is it also, by the way, true that UK universities require your personal statements to be a lot more restrained and less personal and more about what you intend to achieve with your degree? So, more emphasis on that rather than life experiences?
I think that's been my experience also. I think there's just more British culture.
Yeah.
And yeah, with evening also, I read some of my other colleagues' statements too. They were not so much personal, but very, very career oriented and professional. So you can obviously have a personal element in that,
Hmm.
but you have to show how your achievements or your career has reflects that personal attachment
All right. All right.
with the UK
Um,
experience.
Okay, perfect. So Maria, what has your experience been with applying to like primarily US universities? Because I think that the American society is also a lot more effusive when it comes to just generally emotions and stuff than like perhaps European universities or UK universities, and that can also sort of define how you go about tackling your personal statement. So was there any particular formula that worked very well for you when you were applying to US universities?
Yeah, I think in my opinion, your personal statement should be a mixture of your personal experience and your career-oriented goals. It should not be overloaded with just personal experiences or just career-oriented goals. You should try to connect your personal experiences with your career-oriented goals. And I think if you can do that, then that can lead to a really good personal statement. In my case, my personal statement wasn't too personal. It was very career oriented. I explained the work I have done already and all of my experiences, and try to create a kind of an attachment or an interest with that particular field I was applying to. So I tried to show that how I am interested in that particular field. And how I did that, I didn't have any personal story to create that connection, to show my interest. If you do have a personal story, that's great. But if you do not have a personal story to create an interest, you can phrase things in such a manner that the reader will get an impression that the person is very deeply interested in this particular area, in this particular field, and that the reader will actually take some actual steps after he or she's done with the LLM. So also because even in the US, the class sizes, sorry, the word limits were different. Like for the University of Michigan, the word limit was 6 pages. So I had sufficient space. I could easily explain my experiences, and I could connect my personal experience with my career oriented goals. But for other universities such as like Columbia and NYU, they had a word limit of 500 words. So, and it's very challenging if you have only, if you have to summarize all of that in only 500 words or 200 words, as was in Man's case, then it becomes really very challenging. Because it's, I think, like it's easier for someone to communicate if you have sufficient space. And if you do not have sufficient space, then you need to pick and choose. You cannot describe everything. Then you will have to choose, very significant things from your experience that you want, that you think that can be mentioned in your personal statement.
Yeah, and then I guess you could also like sort of try to make space in the rest of your online application for stuff that you can't mention in your personal statement because the word limit is too less. You sort of make space in your CV, you make space in your online application, try to adjust that. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we have broadly covered personal statements, and then if anybody has any questions, they can just ask in the comments, and we can obviously answer them. The next big thing: how do you choose a referee, and how do you ask for a recommendation? What is the sort of process for it, and more importantly, what is the perfect recommendation? And how should you? I guess like the biggest thing that I have, with my students is that they often come to me asking that what should a recommendation entail and how should they ask their professor to actually give it, and sort of guiding the professor through their numerous achievements to sort of tailor make the perfect recommendation. So Umair, we've got you. How did you go about like choosing the perfect referee?
So basically, I had too many references that I could submit. So, but when I looked at the universities, they usually require two references from an applicant. And the weightage of the reference letter varies from university to university. Some universities give more weightage to the reference letter and some don't give it too much weightage. So if you have some professional experience, I'll advise you to submit one academic and one professional letter of reference, which will add value to your application. And one particular thing that I have noticed is that if you are applying to any university and your referee is alumni of that university, then your chances of getting an admission become stronger. And you may consider this if you have multiple options for choosing a reference. Like in the case of Pace University, when I was applying for my LLM, I submitted a reference letter from Justice Jawad Hassan. He's also an alumni of Pace University. So I think this also brightened my chances of getting admission in Pace University. And as far as the structure of the reference letter is concerned, I'll say that ask your instructor to write some personal things like what he think of you and how he think that you are distinguished and better from other students, and why you should why you are pursuing LLM, and from like they should also add some personal touch to the experience that you have already done with them. So basically, I think this is the right way to choose a referee and reference letter.
All right, all right. So Salman, when you chose for when you were like making a list of sort of which referee you want to go for, did you also look at which university that they have sort of attended, or did you sort of go for more of people that you knew very well? So what was your approach?
I am the worst person to ask this question because Australian universities do not require reference letters if you're a fresh graduate. So they only require it if you have a work experience of more than 1 year. So
Oh,
moving
that's
on.
pretty cool, actually. All right,
Yeah.
Amna, do you want to add anything to that?
I think all the points that everybody made. So this has been my experience with Chevening. I don't think that my referees counted, but I don't know if they count for other people because by the time that they shortlisted for interviews, I hadn't sent in my referees. Like I had listed them, but they hadn't sent in the letters of recommendation. So I can assume that for the shortlisting of the interview, they hadn't read them. But again, the general advice that they should know you well, never ever list a relative. That's bad. I did look at where they studied. So one of my referees had studied from SOAS, and she's like a notable alumni of it. I think this might sound like useless advice, but I think having Supreme Court judges, if they know you and you work for them, write references for you, looks really good on an application, but only do that if you work with them and they know you. But I think otherwise, in terms of referees, I'm not quite sure how influential they are. I don't think they were for my application, at least. Because
All
I
right.
think at one point, I think everybody has really impressive resumes and referees.
All right. Well, it might just be like a UK or a Chevening thing as well, because I think maybe Maria can add on to this, but at least the US universities, I believe that they look at referees very, very closely. That's supposed to be something which sort of supplements your personal statements. So, Maria, did you perhaps have like a different approach to choosing referees?
Yeah. So I mean, like, people can disagree with my opinion or with my approach, but my approach was that I should try to approach, get a recommendation letter from a professor or from an employer who knows me well, and with whom I can actually work together, and I can, both of us can work together and write a good recommendation letter. So for me, the priority was not also the credentials of the person who is writing me the recommendation letter. Of course, which university the person attended or what are his or her qualifications and credentials is important. But the way I approached, I think I approached which professor knows me very well and with whom I can work comfortably, so that it's not just that he or she writes me a letter and then submits it, but also that I'm also getting an opportunity to guide him or her that you need to cover all of these points in my recommendation letter. And then he will tell me his opinion that I've covered it like this, are you okay with that? And then I will give a feedback. So it's a it wasn't, for me it was an ongoing process, and I think it helped me because at the end I got recommendation letters, which I think that those were very, very well written. I mean, so even if the if you're not checking the universities of the professor you're getting recommendation letter from, maybe it is better to know to work together with the professor, so that whatever the final outcome of a recommendation letter is, you're satisfied with that outcome. So you should, and I also think that from the US experience, that you should give equal importance to your recommendation letters as much as you give to your personal statement. So if you can work, if you can work together on your recommendation letters, then that's a, for me this thing worked, and I think it's a great idea.
Okay, so clearly, like the experiences of every single like panelist on this particular panel discussion has been quite different when it comes to both personal statements and the referees as well, and it really is largely dictated by the sort of region that you want to apply to. And the sort of university that you want to apply to. And obviously, that is then informed by what you want to do in your sort of future as well. Um, Now, it would be remiss of me to, you know, not mention the fact that we are currently, in the middle of a pandemic, and that changes things considerably for people who want to apply this year. So there's a lot of uncertainty regarding how the experience will be for people who are going to be applying. I know that funding has been cut for a lot of programs. Financial aid is obviously going to be cut for a lot of programs as well, and that is going to drastically impact the number of people who are admitted, as well as the kind of experience that they can possibly have. Um, so, in terms of that, I guess my next question would be, is it worth applying for an LLM in December 2020? Is it an endeavor worth taking if everything is so uncertain? And perhaps like it would be best if, I don't know, Salman answered this question because he's actually in Australia right now. And I'm guessing mostly taking online classes. But Salman, would you like to tackle this question? What has the experience been so far?
Interesting. So my first 2 months were in-person classes, and then COVID happened. So I think it's about what you want from your LLM degree and your constraints. Like if, for instance, Amna mentioned that uh, she had to do LLM before she is 25, then it might be worth it to pursue LLM, even if you're studying online classes just to get that thing ticked off, which could be a reasonable consideration for many people. It could also be, so it depends on where you're going. So in Australia, while the borders are currently closed, what they're doing is that your studies they're counting your studies as if you're studying in Australia. So in
Hmm.
case you have to get a TR later on, or you have to apply for a permanent residency, you don't have to spend the same amount of time studying in Australia. Um, I will admit that experience has been different, particularly in terms of, so like I said, one of the reasons for which I chose Australia was to establish connections, and that thing substantially changed during COVID. Because so how LA happens in Australia is that there is no fixed batch. There are classes which are delivered in regular semester mode and intensive mode, and everyone can take those classes. And I remember the first two classes which I was taking, I had people from Ministry of Foreign Affairs to Ministry of Development to blah blah blah, and those were the best times in terms of establishing classes. When it went online, although there was discussion based on a discussion via Zoom, but it's not the same as the in-person discussion. It might be worth considering if you want to take the risk, like taking a flight. I think Umair would be a better person to answer this question. It might be worth it just to go and see how things work out, whether they will work out. For me, one, I don't know, silver lining was that in Australia the situation of COVID was way better than the rest of the world. So my city did not have to go to a lockdown at all. So the element of experiencing the foreign country and traveling and blah blah blah, that remained. But it all goes down to what you want to do. And considering how things are going, I think it we are going to a new normal, as everyone says. So yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah. And I guess it also like ultimately depends, like if you manage to get a really good scholarship and even it's online, like that could still be very, very credible in terms of
Yeah,
employment later on as well.
I'm
Yeah.
guessing we'll have to wait a bit to see how employers treat online degrees.
Mhm.
Even if you're on a scholarship or not. But I'm guessing if you're on a scholarship, why not?
Yeah.
Especially considering, even if you have to stay in Pakistan and do an online LM and you're on a scholarship, many people, and I know in Australia many people have chosen to convert their degrees into part time. So they're working full time and then studying LM part time because it's online. And the same thing would not be possible if you're actually going to the countries. Like, just a small silver lining.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, absolutely. Umair, just talking about employability, we've got like a question that I think is tailor-made for you. So there's somebody in the audience who wants to ask that from a global employability perspective, is it better to have a journal LLM degree or declare a certain specialization? And I just want to add on to it. At what point do you think that somebody should start thinking about a specialization? Is it something that you need to sort of make a decision on right away in your personal statement, right, even before you enter the university? Or is it something that you go through a process and then hopefully come out making a decision about it?
Thank you, Ruba. First of all, I would like to comment on what Salman said. From my own experience, I had to take my second semester online in KU Leuven because of COVID, and I'm also taking my first semester in PACE online. I can tell you from my own experience that although taking classes online has its own benefits, it is at the same time very challenging, because when you are sitting in your comfortable environment, you often lose focus, and it is very hard to make friends and interact with others this way. So my advice to you all would be to monitor the pandemic situation and go for LLM next year in August or September, when hopefully the pandemic situation will be better, and you will get a chance to take classes in person, make friends, get some international exposure for which you are spending millions of rupees or investing your precious time. So the as far as your second question is concerned, I guess that depends on person to person. I think if you have a keen interest in any area of law and want to specialize in any area, then you should particularly go for that specialization. If you are looking just to familiarize yourself with diverse areas of law, or you want to have an option to choose from the variety of courses that the university offers, then you should choose general LLM. If I tell you from my experience, I have always been interested in pursuing environmental law since the time I joined Justice Rawat Hassan or Dr. Pervez Hassan. Therefore, I chose to do this LLM in environmental law, and I'll definitely keep pursuing this field.
Yeah. So we've also got like another question, which Amna, I think that you can perhaps like give a holistic perspective on. Somebody in the audience wants to say, would you advise against pursuing an LLM right after graduation? So you know how you mentioned about age being like a factor which often deters especially women from pursuing an LLM later on after years of experience. But is it something that you would actively advise against, to people in the audience right now?
Um, no, I wouldn't advise against it, but you should know why you're going for an LLM then. And I think there are basically like three reasons why. Either you want to teach, then it's like better that you get an LLM right away, or you want to like start your practice abroad, then you shouldn't really waste time here and look for jurisdictions which are friendly. Or thirdly, which is mine, was that like if you get a scholarship, then it's like I said, during these times it's always like take funding rather than investing in something, especially a master's. uh and also, like, fourthly, if you know exactly what you want to do, then I would suggest going straight after graduation. But if you were like me, who took like a general LLM and then who midway found what you wanted to do, I wouldn't suggest it. So, for example,
Okay.
if you were graduating and you knew all along you wanted to go into tax law, then I would like advise you to apply to NYU and get it done with. But if you just kind of want like a general LLM, like the unless you're really lucky, the education experience might feel like a sixth year of your LLB.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. Another question in the audience. I think Maria, you're the perfect person to answer this question. So somebody's asking, how important is establishing a balance between your academic credentials and your extracurricular activities? Is there a difference in how UK universities and US universities weigh these factors? I'm guessing this person is asking this in terms of, crafting their application.
I mean, is this question about how to establish a balance between academic credentials and extracurricular activities during the time in LLM?
Yeah, I think you can just answer both questions. So you can answer sort of like what happens during the LLM, how do you balance it? And perhaps talk about the notion of a perfect LLM if there is such a thing. And then you could also talk about how do you establish that within your sort of application. So we could
Right.
tackle.
Yeah, so maybe I would just like to mention a little bit of my own experience. That for me, my LLM experience was a bit challenging in a sense that I was facing this difficulty to establish a balance between academics and extracurricular activities, because studies were tough for me during my LLM. And like I understand that LUMS, it trains you for a competitive environment, but I was going for my LLM after 1.5 year of work experience. So coming back to studying was difficult for me. So for me, I decided that I don't think that I could manage studies and extracurricular activities, and it was becoming difficult. So I think it's better if you have your priorities set well before you go for your LLM, or at the because you want to take most of the time. LLM is just 1 year, and you want to perform well. You want to get good grades. You want to take part in all extracurricular activities. You want to take part in journals, and you want to participate in moot court competitions, and at the same time you want to travel and take part in all fun activities. So it gets difficult to maintain a balance in all of these things. So what you should do is you should set your priorities. And for instance, are grades important to you? If maybe grades are important for a person who wants to pursue a PhD after his or her LLM. So then maybe you'll have to cut down some of your other experiences and activities, and try to concentrate in your studies and on your grades. But if you want to come back to Pakistan and practice Pakistan, so maybe in that case, grades for you are not that important. So the point being that you need to set your priorities very clear, so that so that you do not struggle at that time in managing and in juggling between all of these things.
Yeah, yeah. And, like, just something to add on to, priorities also change during your LLM year. I think that sometimes people sort of forget, and they have a very specific idea of what they want to do before they enter the LLM program. And then they go through somewhat of a transformative experience when they find out that in the end they actually want something else. And then some of the dishappiness or like unhappiness with the whole experience also lies in not having your expectations met during that LLM year. So it's also very important to stay as flexible as possible about your priorities, and being sort of kind to yourself that they may change over the year.
Yeah.
um
I mean,
yeah.
I agree with you, Aruba, because in my case, I was very over enthusiastic when I was going there. I was like that I'm going to take part in journals, in moot court competitions, I'm going to travel, I'm going to do everything. But then when I landed there and I realized that studies were tough for me. So I told myself that, Maria, you don't need to do all of these things. You need to calm down. You have to pick and choose your battles. So it's okay if you're not participating in a moot court competition. It's completely okay, because I mean, I'm not a good multitasker. So I think whatever you do, even if you are picking only one or two things at one time, then you should try to do those things, and you should try to give your maximum to those things, instead of like becoming jack of all trades but not becoming master of anything. So,
Yeah.
and the situation gets clear, as you have mentioned. You set your priorities before going for your LLM, but then when you reach there, then you should be flexible enough to change your priorities and to analyze and evaluate everything.
Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
I add to this?
Yeah, of
Uh,
course.
Adding to this, when I arrived, there was just so much work to do that I set my goal, and my goal was getting some work experience. So I said there were these essay competitions that you could win if you wanted to intern at a law firm. And when I arrived, that was the one goal I set. And I did, like, when you come, you're so confused, you want to participate in everything, but it makes sense to like put some long-term goals and focus on that. So for me, it was just one thing, or winning those essay competitions, and I think that did help in the long run.
Okay. Okay. And in terms of I'm sorry, Amna, but in terms of when you were actually applying for your LLM, did you also sort of like maintain a balance in your application when you were talking about academics and extracurricular? And do you think that there's actually a difference in how US universities approach that?
Um, well, when you look at the US UK thing, you have to be aware that UK has much younger applicants because they have a very different way that they study law. So I would assume that US goes for more lawyers. I'm not sure, but in the UK, you're going to have a very young class, people who just graduated from 3 years of LLB, and then they're going to masters, so they're going to be 21, 22 years old. So while applying, you have to look at that a little bit when I apply to universities. that they'll be aware that you don't really have that much experience of extracurriculars. But when it came to chevening, I feel like more than academic, it was my extracurriculars that mattered in the scholarship. Um, when it came to academics, what you really had to focus on was tying your career goals with your academics. But I don't, when it comes to, I think, like scholarships like those, which are very work oriented, academics just kind of plays a part to the extent of justifying your degree, not more than that, for me personally.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So then we have got like a variety of ways of, just to sum up for the audience, then we've got like a variety of ways in which people can potentially approach their applications. So depending on the kind of scholarship, things can be very different. You know, different scholarships can look at purely leadership potential. So there, the extracurricular activities would matter more, irrespective of whether that's for the US or the UK. And then I guess for the US universities, extracurriculars can matter, and they and work experience especially can make up for grades, just like in Ameri's case. So it really does depend on which region that you're applying for. Um, all right. So I guess like
Ruba, sorry
one of the
to cut you off.
yes, yes, Omer.
Sorry to, yeah, yeah. Sorry to cut you off, but I have another meeting that has already been started, so I have to go. If you have any
Please go ahead.
questions, you can ask me. And otherwise, this was a very good session, and I enjoyed it a lot. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Omer, for being here, and we'll pass on any questions that we have for you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Um, All right, I think we have covered a lot of questions, but there is this one question in the audience which I think is so important, especially for people who are going to be struggling with finances. Is there a way, and what are the sort of strategies which you personally employed or can be employed by students when they're actually pursuing their LLM degrees to sort of cover their finances in case they haven't gotten full scholarship? Um, so is there any way that part-time jobs, for instance, can make up for some of the maintenance costs that are required during your LLM year? Anyone in the panel can tackle this question.
I think it, can I start?
Yeah,
I
yeah, go
think
ahead.
it depends where you are. So, for example, if you're in the UK, they have, I think, good minimum wage laws and all. So, I know a lot of people, you can work 20 hours a week as an international student. And I know people who were managing that well, even with like a waitressing job. Uh, I mean, I did have the funding, but I was still working at my Pakistani job, which was obviously not enough, but it was good bonus money. It was writing articles. So even if you can't like find a job at that country, I think any kind of finances help as long as you can manage it. So don't really be shy even for looking for like writing jobs in Pakistan or something. Uh,
Hmm.
but I think it does depend on where you are and how well they pay. Like UK is generally very good at paying, even like small jobs. Maybe it's different for other countries.
Yeah, yeah. I think the US also has like a set number of hours, so people can work for 20 maximum hours. They can work in libraries or they can work at a small cafe if they want to take up a research assistant position. But those, of course, will not be substantial enough to cover a lot of money. I think the maximum that a student in the US can earn for the entire year would be like $3,000 or so. Salman, do you have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, so it's the same for Australia that students can work for 20 hours a week. Um, I it was hard for me to get a job because of COVID-19. But generally, what I've seen from people is that if people from Pakistan, so what most of them are doing is that even if they're working on minimum wages, which is around $21 an hour, it's easy to cover the rent cost and you can survive on food, but you can't do much. Um, you have to be a bit strategic about how you're going about your finances. For instance, if you are starting in the time of November, December. There are a lot of places who are hiring for Christmas sales, and they pay very good money. If you're working after 5 p.m., the Australian law is that the amount you're getting gets multiplied by 1.5 times, and if you're working on weekends, it gets multiplied by 2. So it is difficult to manage finances. I think it's impossible to pay off the fee for second semester. It's not impossible. I think most of my friends who are from Pakistan, they are self-financing themselves and their families by doing things like um, Uber Eats. Uh, even I know a couple of women who are doing Uber Eats to earn around $600 a week, which is a good enough money considering that the average rent per apartment is $250 per week, and then you have $400 to spend on what you want to do. So it is possible. There are opportunities, but it's all about your luck and your effort.
Yeah, so what I guess what I'm seeing like across the board is that it's probably a good idea to sort of like sort out your finances before you go there. And one of the ways obviously is a scholarship, but in case you're like unable to do so, another way that most students are not aware of is also sort of negotiating the kind of money that you can get out of the university before you actually accept their offer. And I think Maria has a lot of experience with that. Maria, I think you negotiated with the University of Michigan for like a lot of finances. So do you mind sharing that and like just telling the students how they can negotiate with their universities in case they do get accepted?
Yeah. So I think it's a very important question, and it's not an easy thing, because even when I was in this entire process, I was like emailing to university. I was very confused, and I was getting my email checked and proofread by multiple people before sending it, because but what I have learned from my experience is that once they have given you admission, so that indicates that they want you to come to their university, and that means that you are in a position that you can actually demand money from them, and you need to be honest and don't shy away in asking like amount of if you cannot afford tuition, and don't shy away in asking that, because the concern here is once they have given you admission, then they ask how much you can pay, and that's a very tricky question, because you want the university to pay you the entire amount. You want them to pay as much, whatever the maximum amount is. But at the same time, you do not want to lose your admission on the basis that what if the university is unable to pay me that maximum amount. So here you need to indicate to the university one thing, that you're very interested in this particular program, and that even though you have applied to other universities, but how that particular university and that particular program is your top priority, and that you really want to come to that university, and lack of finances should not be an obstacle for you. Otherwise it will be it will be quite difficult for you. Your interest in the university and program is one thing that you need to indicate, and this entire process is done after you have already, they have given you admission. So the only medium of communication is emails, or you can assist your emails with some supplementary letters, and explaining your financial situation. That can also help, because if they know that someone is actually in financial need, and they really want to come to their university, and if they have already given you admission, then the university will try its best to give you as much as the amount that you're actually asking. But at the same time, it's very tricky. It depends on on a case by case basis. But one another tip that I can give is that once they have given you admission, and they're still deciding your scholarship decision, they're still deciding how much amount to give you, just keep in touch with them. like don't just start bugging them by sending email every single day, but after regular intervals, ask them about what they have decided. Show them your interest, or tell them that you're waiting for them to tell you a reply, because you have other universities shortlisted as well. So keep in touch with them so that they know that this particular student is very much interested to come to this university. This was the approach that I took, and fortunately, I was able to manage the entire negotiation process very well. But at the end, now I think about it, so maybe it was just luck. So it's a mixture of things. It really depends on a case by case basis.
Yeah, but like if finances are definitely a problem, then absolutely go for negotiating as much
Yes,
as you can.
yes,
Can I add?
definitely.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I think one tactic that worked for my friends was that they applied to as many places as possible. And so, to their dream universities, once they got the admission, they would tell them how much funding they got from other universities and then try to get a negotiation. So, I know that some like UC Berkeley, I know it considers how much funding other universities gets and it tries to top that. So I've been told that this is a good negotiation tactic, telling them what other offers you have and how much they're giving.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Especially if you don't like have a scholarship in hand, then this can be a very, very useful tactic. I understand that we've sort of drifted away from like the main focus of the conversation. Maybe we're talking too much about what happens after you get accepted. So let's bring the conversation back. And as a last question before we close this panel discussion, what do you think are the biggest mistakes that you have seen applicants make in their applications and the things that really bring an applicant down? Um, so, what are the biggest mistakes that you definitely don't want the audience to make? And I guess, Salman, you can take care of this first, and then Amna can go, and then finally Maria.
Um, I think the biggest mistake which I've even seen people who are currently doing LLM is that they're not absolutely sure that they want to do LLM and why they want to do LLM. So what that results in that when you're actually studying, you're in a sort of a limbo and you're considering whether you want to study that particular course, whether you want to study this particular course, whether this is the right field for you. So the time to decide that is before you apply for the university. When you get in the university or when you decide to apply for the university, the only thing which you can focus on is how to get the maximum out of that 1 year which you have. And I've seen too many people here who are just hovering around, taking random courses, just trying to get by, just trying to pass that credit limit so that they can get a degree. So it's okay to wait. I didn't wait because of my reasons. It's perfectly fine to wait and to figure out what you want to do, but please don't rush. Don't go for LM unless you are absolutely sure what you want to do.
All right. Amna, do you've got any advice?
I've read a lot of essays of people who, submitted their applications this year for Chevening. And it's like, it's kind of strange. I think like some people who've done so much don't really know how to write essays or how to sell themselves, because your essays are the most important thing. Once you get shortlisted for the interview, there's like I think 40% chance you'll get it. So I've seen like people who've really done nothing write really good essays and really talk themselves up. And I've seen other people, like especially women, who've done so much, but they won't know how to really sell themselves. So going into it, like be really confident. Don't try to be humble. Like don't try to be really over the top either, but don't try to be humble. Like, they want someone who will stand out. And secondly, this is for like a lot of people who've emailed me. If you're not really good at editing and not good at English, unfortunately, you have to get the English down to perfect. This is not just for the LUMS people, but people from all over who apply. Like no matter how credible you are, you have to get the editing really really good. Otherwise, like my last advice would be know how to like link everything. So I've either seen people going all just telling about what they've done, or other people just being very, very dramatic about their personal life. You have to find a good balance in your essays. So this is just like the three observations I've noticed checking people's essays. Um, Otherwise, yeah, I think for the first stage, the essays, it's really important.
Yeah, yeah, and also like to sort of build together a cohesive narrative, one that sort of explains why you're actually going for an LLM, how that ties in with your personal life and your future aims. Um, yeah, Maria, any last words, any last advice for people on what
I think
not to do?
yeah, Salman and Amna have given really good advice. I would just like to add that one thing that Salman has mentioned is very important, that apply with serious consideration. And I just want to add that you need to spend adequate time in the entire application process. Just don't apply haphazardly, spend time in your applications. Because like most of the times I get requests from friends and other people that can you please proofread my personal statement, and then I'm like, yeah, sure, can I get it done in like 3 to 4 days, and they're like, no, the deadline is day after tomorrow, and I'm like, you need to give some time to even to me to proofread it. So you have to spare some time for people you will be sending your personal statement to proofread and edit. You it shouldn't be a very quick or haphazard process. You need to dedicate your time, and if you think you cannot do that because of your tough work schedules or your hectic routines, then it's okay. You should wait instead of like just applying uh, under the time constraints. It's better to wait.
Yeah. Yeah. And like everything is already available on the internet. You just need to know how to sort of research it accurately. Everything is available on the websites of the universities. You've got a great alumni association that you can also ask questions for. So I think we are pretty much done with the time. In fact, we've gone over time. Thank you so much, everyone, especially to all the audience out there and the panelists as well. I feel like we've had a fruitful discussion which has sort of teased out the most important elements in the application process as well as what happens afterwards. And we've also tried to hint at how to sort of deal with the COVID-19 situation and how to just sort of like do your best and see how things go depending on the offers that you receive and the scholarships that you receive. If there are any more questions, please feel free to just sort of write them down and I'll ask the panelists or I can personally write down the answers for them. Um, Thank you so much for everything. And I think we are done.
Thank you.